On Mars, a sphere gets a one-way ticket to space courtesy of a ginormous kaboom. Meanwhile, in England, Amy and George spot the Martian firework through their nosy neighbor Ogilvy's telescope. Ogilvy, feeling generous, hands them a Martian postcard and welcomes them to the hood. As the Martian souvenir sails through space, our couple retreats to their cottage, nursing hurt feelings from the neighborhood cold shoulder. Next day, George is stuck at the newspaper office, playing detective on a bank boo-boo. But when he hears of a trip to the Admiralty, he volunteers faster than a cat on a hot tin roof, hoping for some juicy gossip from his brother. George patiently waits for Minister and Brother Frederick to finish their the best speech before pulling Frederick aside for a private chat. The brothers haven't caught up in a while, and George wishes Frederick would drop by for tea and give Amy a chance. But Frederick's still miffed about George's scandalous love life and refuses to be seen with them. Meanwhile, Ogilvy's busy snapping Martian selfies, intrigued by the smoke signals. Back home, George breaks the news to Amy. Frederick's not playing Cupid for their divorce. To add insult to injury, his boss keeps slapping another reporter's name on George's articles. Suddenly, their house turns into a disco with flashing lights and shaking floors. Stepping outside, they see a smoke trail painting the sky. Ogilvy, ever the adventurer, dashes off into the night to play detective. Meanwhile, in a lonely red land, a weird red robot-like thingy is surrounded by smoke, looking a bit worse for wear. Come morning, Ogilvy invites the couple to check out his forest find. They follow a scorched trail to a mysterious sphere that's been playing bowling with the trees. Ogilvy is convinced it's a space rock and is called the Royal Astronomer. But the couple fears it might be a Russian party crasher. George snaps a few pics and, with the telegraph lines down, he's off to the office with a scoop. But the editor wants to hand the story to another reporter, causing George to flip his lid and demand answers. Turns out, the newspaper's owner has blacklisted George for not playing by the old-school rules. Furious, George quits faster than a hiccup. He then visits his wife to plead for a divorce, arguing they were as happy as cats in water. But she refuses, vowing to keep George all to herself out of spite. Back in the forest, a crowd has gathered to help excavate the sphere. Ogilvy pokes the meteor with his trowel, and it responds with a ground-shaking tantrum, cracking open like an overcooked egg. Just then, Royal Astronomer Stent struts in with his entourage and a gaggle of cops to take over the show. A crowd of rubberneckers gathers around the dig, and George shows up, playing Where's Amy? The sphere starts grumbling like a hungry stomach, and Ogilvy detects a tick-tock sound from within. The sphere's surface cracks open, shedding its brown shell to reveal a slick black interior. Stent gets up close and personal with the object, earning a handful of black goo. His reflection sticks around on the sphere even as he backs off, disappearing only when the sphere starts its spinning routine and levitates. Suddenly, Stent's arm catches fire, and as the sphere spins faster, it turns into a human barbecue. Scared out of their wits, everyone scatters, oblivious to the sphere's final spin and disintegration. Its black dust settles into the still rumbling crater. George and Amy dash home to help their maid find her missing sister. Stepping outside, they spot another sphere skydiving into a nearby lake. Meanwhile, in the Red Land, an adult and a kid are on a crystal scavenger hunt in a desolate area. They eventually stumble upon city ruins, looking for a safe haven. The next day, George returns to the forest to find Ogilvy, only to be greeted by an artillery unit treating the incident like a campfire gone wrong. Jane also goes on an Ogilvy hunt at his house and finds his Martian photo album, confirming her extraterrestrial suspicions. Back in the forest, the crater starts glowing and moving like something's about to pop. At the newspaper office, Frederick learns of George's dramatic exit. Finding a childhood photo of them on the desk, Frederick feels a pang of guilt for abandoning his brother. The editor shows him a map, pinpointing the explosion near George's home. Back in town, George and Amy have a future chat, only to be interrupted by a strange noise. Suddenly, soldiers flood the streets, urging everyone to run from an impending something. But it's too late. Explosions start popping like popcorn. As buildings crumble, George and Amy rush home to their maid, only to witness a wall collapse on her. A terrified horse gallops by and George grabs it for a quick getaway. But they're stopped in their tracks by their dog's cries. George runs to the rescue, just as a giant alien machine, the tripod, rises above the town, its blue lights revealing it as the crater's resident. Its rampage causes debris to rain down, blocking the road and splitting the couple. George tells Amy to skedaddle and seek Frederick's help, and she gallops away, shedding tears as more fireworks light up her beloved. Fast forward a few hours, and the town's gone from quaint to post-apocalyptic. Over in London, Frederick and the Prime Minister are playing should we or shouldn't we with the truth. The palace is now a refugee camp, and Amy shows up, playing Where's George. Frederick's miffed at Amy, blaming her for George's predicament, but clams up when Amy drops the baby bombshell. Meanwhile, on the Red Land, it turns out the two explorers are Amy and her mini-me, George Jr. Plot twist. This isn't Mars. It's future London, now a ruin-filled wasteland. Amy checks the survivor's wall of notes, but finds no sign of her missing person. Later, she picks up some grub from the drive-thru, and Junior finds a Martian comic book on the floor. Back in the present, a pile of debris stirs, and George pops out like a jack-in-the-box, alive and kicking. With the town deserted, George returns to his cottage and finds the maids vanished. Unable to find Amy, he pens a just-in-case letter to her. Suddenly, he hears a whistle, which turns out to be a soldier playing survivor's seat. They team up to find an exit, but a baby's cries lead them on a rescue mission. Unfortunately, the tripod gate crashes again and the men play hide-and-seek behind a building. The tripod continues its laser light show, and soon the baby's cries go silent, signaling the worst. Undeterred, the duo presses on and eventually stumbles upon another ruined town. George wants to press on to London to find Amy, but the artillery unit's leader plays the duty card to keep him in check. Meanwhile, in London, Amy is playing Where's George among the refugees, but with no luck. Frederick suggests George might have returned to his wife, given his absence from the records. Later, Amy presents Ogilvy's Martian snaps to Frederick and the Prime Minister, finally convincing them of the alien invasion. The Prime Minister makes a public announcement, assuring everyone they've got the world's best army on their side. In the future, Junior's engrossed in his comic book, and Amy tells him his dad was a war hero against the aliens. The comic book reveals the army's struggle because their weapons were as effective as water guns. Back in the present, the artillery unit finds the second sphere in the forest and gears up for an attack, ignoring George's "I told you so" warning. As the sphere spins and floats, they give it a cannon and gunfire salute until it bursts into black dust. But on closer inspection, they find a piece of black metal, revealing the sphere was just playing dress-up. Suddenly, a tripod appears, ignoring the general's peace offering, and starts a one-sided laser tag game with the soldiers. George manages to sprint away, pausing only to see more tripods joining the party. Meanwhile, Earth is being bombarded with a rain of spheres. In the future, Amy plays Robin Hood, stealing a can of beans for herself while feeding refugees. One of the men notices and demands she pay with her body, turning the soup kitchen into a courtroom. Later at home, Amy discovers her stolen treasure is actually a can of rotten food. Back in the present, London gets a smoky makeover, announcing the tripod's grand entrance. People start a panic marathon as buildings crumble and the tripods add more smoke to the mix, turning the city into a darkroom. Amy, Frederick, and the Prime Minister play hide-and-seek in a tunnel, locking the door behind them. But the minister suddenly freezes, and a dark liquid spills from his mouth. The smoke is a poison gas, sneaking into the tunnel through the vents. With the minister out of the game, Frederick and Amy continue their tunnel run, emerging on a bridge crowded with escapees. Outside the city, George hits the road and is heartbroken to see London falling too. Some kind survivors share their water with George, and Mrs. Elphinston suggests the beach as a possible reunion spot with Amy. In the future, Amy gets a visit from a priest, who reminds her she's the only one with a living child, making her feel like a lottery winner. He also reveals a survivor has shown up at church asking for her, confusing her because she thought all her loved ones were extinct. After the priest leaves, Amy grabs George's letter for reread. Back in the present, George helps a sick couple reach the beach, now a bustling port with thousands trying to escape on emergency boats. In the scramble for a spot, Frederick gets an update from a soldier. All government buildings are toast. The army is helpless because their weapons are as effective as pebbles against the tripods. Amy wants to continue her George hunt, but Frederick thinks the baby is priority and shoos her onto a boat. Just then, George finds Frederick and hears about the boat, so he starts an Amy chant. Amy hears him and they both dive into the water for reunion. Suddenly, another explosion rings out and the tripods crash the beach party too. Many boats are zapped and sink, but George and Amy manage to rescue a little girl, Lillian, before retreating to the shore, where they watch a tripod finally bite the dust. The group, now with Frederick, starts a mad dash as more tripods join the party, only to faceplant in the sand. In the future, Amy waits for a mystery guest, who turns out to be Ogilvy. He pulled a Houdini because he was sick, then joined the government to play inventor of new weapons. Eventually, Even the government buildings ran out of grub, so he decided to return. When Ogilvy asks about George, Amy says he got lost in the war shuffle and never resurfaced. Ogilvy explains people's memories are like broken mirrors. It wasn't a glorious war victory. It was a ceiling. His theory is that the aliens used the black smoke as a planet killer and Mars makeover kit, given the red look, baby drought, and mysterious shard growth. Amy wonders if the army really defeated the aliens, noting that many people had felt sick back then. Ogilvy immediately goes into research mode, gathering samples and chatting with Amy. He explains his escape was a river jump and asks Amy about her escape, but she draws a blank. In the present, George's group, now with Mrs. Elphinston, returns to town to play hide in the house during a thunderstorm. There's no water on tap, but at least they can rest. Suddenly, the buildings start a shake dance, and everyone dives under the furniture as a tripod plays flashlight through the window. It leaves after finding nothing. Then the adults make sure to lock the doors, oblivious to the lurking danger. The next morning, the group wakes up to discover it's still dark even if it's 9 a.m. Stepping outside, they find the black smoke playing high in the sun. There's also a fallen tripod outside the house, and they're clueless about what knocked it out since the army isn't in the area. George and Mrs. Elphinston aren't feeling well, and George wonders if there was something funky in the water they drank. Amy and Frederick play scavenger hunt in the house, attributing any noise to a banging door. However, an alien creature is tailing them in the darkness. When they make it upstairs, the noises get louder. Amy tiptoes into a room, only to be startled by a window side body. Frederick checks on her and realizes the roofs are littered with refugee bodies, courtesy of the aliens. At that moment, they hear the tripod's loud noise, so they sprint back to the kitchen to play hide under the tables with George and Lillian. Mrs. Elphinston is too weak to move, and the flashing light through the window spots her. Soon, a grotesque alien creature enters the room, stabs Mrs. Elphinston with its claw, then uses a stinger to drain her life force before dragging the body away. In the future, Amy worries about Junior because he's also sick and the hunger is making it worse. All around her, sick folks are carted off to a fiery farewell while Ogilvy plays Martian peeping Tom with his telescope. Amy wonders if the aliens also fell victim to this sickness and nudges Ogilvy to play doctor and whip up a serum. To convince him, she admits she remembers her escape. She just doesn't enjoy the reruns, then spills the beans. Back in the present, George and Frederick engage in a heated debate on their next move. Frederick's all for DIY bombs and a counterattack, but George sees the invasion as karma for Britain's world domination. Both men soon lose their cool, and Amy has to play referee, pointing out that the exit is the right choice. The group tiptoes to the door, spotting an alien doing a funny walk down the street, probably due to the sickness. Lillian realizes she dropped her toy and goes back to grab it, but an alien pops up and swiftly ends her game. The remaining adults make a run for it, and Frederick confronts the other alien, hurling his homemade bombs at it. But the fire doesn't faze it, and the beast promptly ends Frederick. George and Amy duck into another building, and Amy spots a rash of spots on George's skin, a telltale sign of the illness. Peeking outside, Amy sees an alien feasting on Frederick's body, realizing they only leave the tripods when it's snack time. It's the sick human flesh diet that's killing them. Hours pass with no escape route as the creature stands guard outside, and George starts losing his marbles. Unable to silence the voices in his head, he decides to play the hero so Amy and the baby can escape. Amy tries to slap some sense into him, but he plants a goodbye kiss on her before stepping outside. A heartbroken Amy watches as her love is attacked and devoured by an alien, but she makes his sacrifice count and bolts. She escapes the town safely, and finding their old cottage, she discovers the letter, which turns on the waterworks. In the future, Amy and Ogilvy pitch their theory to the priest, but he refuses to let them play mad scientist on sick people. Left with no choice, Amy lets Ogilvy draw blood from Junior, and he uses it to concoct a serum that he sprays all over the fields. A few days later, Ogilvy calls Amy over to show off the serum's success. The mysterious crystals are disintegrating under its power, so they persuade the priest to plant the last few seeds. A few weeks later, Amy gives Junior a history lesson about the good old days. Once he's asleep, she steps outside and spots a lone shrub rising from the ashes. The serum is working its magic, signaling the dawn of a new civilization. As the sun finally peeks out on Earth again, Amy gears up to welcome the new world.